The Reaper's Revenge: How Rejecting Causal Finitism Also Leads to God. A while ago, I made up a not super serious argument for God called the argument from time travel. I thought it was interesting, but I freely admitted that I didn't think it would be super convincing. However, I found hiding behind that argument a more serious argument that might actually be worth examining. I call it the argument from Modal Maximalism. To understand this argument, though, you should already have some understanding of causal finitism and the Grim Reaper paradox. If you haven't heard about any of that before, you need to check out one of my videos that explains all that. If you don't, then this argument will be very hard to follow. But the basic idea is this. Chains of cause and effect happen in our world. Can such chains be infinitely long? If you say no, then the chain of cause and effect must have begun with something which caused stuff to happen without itself being caused. That looks suspiciously like God. But if you think that infinitely long causal chains are possible, then you have a problem. Some infinitely long causal chains, like the Grim Reaper paradox for example, lead to contradictions. Now, we're going to focus on worldviews which attempt to hang on to infinite causal chains. The most pressing objection in my mind to things like the Grim Reaper paradox is this. Even if some infinite chains of cause and effect end up with contradictions, there are still many that don't. Take, for example, the bouncing ball world, which has an infinitely old ball which has just been bouncing around in a little box for all of eternity. This is arguably an infinite chain of cause and effect. Are you telling me that because some infinite causal chains are paradoxical, I need to automatically give up any and all infinite causal chains whatsoever? That's preposterous! The bouncing ball world isn't contradictory at all. And I think that's a fair question. But we also need to ask, if these safe infinite causal chains are really possible, then why aren't these unsafe infinite causal chains possible as well? Now, if you misunderstand my question, you may respond by saying, because unsafe chains are contradictions, and contradictions are impossible. But that misses my point. Allow me to illustrate. Say we have an infinity of Grim Reapers, each assigned a natural number. Their manager is supposed to tell them when to try and kill Fred. So to make it really easy to schedule all the Reapers, he makes a sign telling them to kill Fred 2 to the power of negative n hours, blank 11 o'clock, where n is the natural number assigned to them. The manager can fill that blank with a sign that says before or after. If he puts in the sign that says before, this will schedule the Reapers in an unparadoxical way. What would happen is that Reaper 1 kills Fred at 10:30. Then an infinity of other Reapers do nothing. This is a perfect example of a safe chain. We have infinite Reapers trying to kill Fred. Reaper 1 is the one that succeeds. No problem. But if the manager puts the word after in the blank slot, the Grim Reaper paradox will form a contradictory scenario. So out of the possible futures, some contain safe chains and some contain unsafe chains. My question is simply, if causal finitism is false, and the possible futures containing safe chains really are possible, then why aren't the futures with unsafe chains really possible as well? Well, to maintain that contradictions really are impossible, we must posit some sort of mechanism that ensures that unsafe chains can't ever happen. Great. So what is this mechanism? What properties does it have? Well, here's a crazy hypothesis. It's this dude right here. His name is Jim. He runs around working really hard to make sure that unsafe chains don't ever occur. What properties must Jim have for this theory of causality to be true? Well, he needs to have the ability to cause things to happen. It seems absurd to say that Jim ensures that the after sign doesn't get put up without saying that he also causes it to not be put up. But if Jim's causal power was limited in some sort of way, then Jim could be overpowered and he would be unable to ensure that unsafe chains don't happen. So Jim needs to have no limitation on his power. Next, Jim would need to basically know everything to be able to know whether an unsafe chain is about to occur anywhere in the universe, so that he knows how to stop it. Lastly, Jim cannot fail to exist. If Jim could fail to exist, then we don't have an explanation for why unsafe chains don't occur in the possible futures where Jim doesn't exist. We would need yet another mechanism to stop unsafe chains. Now, of course, Jim is really just a silly placeholder that I used as a way to illustrate the conditions to actually working as a kind of mechanism we're looking for. So just forget about Jim for now. I just want to turn your attention to the list of the properties that any viable mechanism would need to have. Whatever you think the mechanism is, it would need to be very godlike. And since you need such a mechanism to exist to reject causal finitism, then there must be some godlike thing, like this. There you go, that's the gist of the argument. Now, I haven't considered any objections to the argument, or even formulated it deductively, so let's look at that now. We're going to start by formulating the argument deductively. Premise 1, some infinite causal chains are possible. That is to say, causal finitism is false. Premise 2, some infinite causal chains are not possible, like the Grim Reaper paradox. 3, if some infinite causal chains are possible and some are impossible, then there must exist some mechanism which ensures that impossible causal chains can't occur. 4, a mechanism which ensures that impossible causal chains can't occur must be godlike. 5, therefore, there must exist something which is godlike. Now, I want the word mechanism to be viewed very broadly. Premise 3 doesn't make any claim to what the mechanism would look like. Is it a concrete thing? Is it a metaphysical law? We don't make any claim about that until premise 4, which means that this premise should receive the most attack. The way this would need to be attacked is by giving examples of mechanisms which do not invoke a godlike thing, yet still explain why safe chains can occur while unsafe ones cannot. For example, a skeptic could posit that determinism is metaphysically necessary and then restrict their modality, a fancy way of saying their beliefs about possibility, so that they only think very specific worlds are possible, maybe worlds that just cycle between finitely many physical states via boring physical laws on a discrete timeline. I don't know, something like that. Now, the points I would make invariably are that, first, one might as well accept causal finitism if one is willing to posit such pricey metaphysical commitments about what is and isn't possible. Second, positing God allows us to maximize modality and not give up on things like indeterminism or worlds with infinitely many possible physical states or worlds with continuous time. This line of thinking inspired the argument's name. The person who rejects causal finitism wanted to avoid writing off stuff as impossible unnecessarily, and positing God allows one to do just that. Now, the last objection I want to face is this. God doesn't make unsafe chains contradiction-y enough. It seems that we're just really lucky that God has decided to make sure unsafe chains don't occur. But couldn't he have decided to allow them? The answer is no. God necessarily has the specific nature that he does. And according to this theory, God would have a nature that entailed that he would always stop unsafe chains. So they are as impossible as can be. Now, someone may respond that it still seems crazy to say that a being has the causal power to actualize a contradiction, even if they never use it. And I would agree, that is a big problem with this theory, but this problem stems from rejecting causal finitism, not from God's existence. Now, at the beginning of the video, I said that this was inspired by the argument from time travel. How does that tie in? Well, it turns out you can run the argument from modal maximalism again, but instead using backwards causal chains rather than infinitely long causal chains. Some backwards causal chains include contradictions, like the grandfather paradox, but some don't. So you could either just throw out all backwards causation, or you could say some backwards causal chains are possible and posit a godlike mechanism for why unsafe variations never occur. Anyways, to sum up the argument, some infinite causal chains are impossible. You could respond to this by throwing out infinite causal chains altogether, in which case you will be faced with there being a first cause which was itself uncaused. But if you want to say some infinite causal chains are possible, then you need to provide a mechanism for why the impossible chains don't occur, a necessarily existing, all-powerful mechanism. That's the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Please hit subscribe if you enjoyed this content.